Like art, you can make up things. Just like in science, you could like do an experiment about what you're making.
In science, you can make colors, and or you can do colors too.
Mixing together colors, that's science and art.
I like integrating in school because then you get to learn about the same thing each time and then you get really good at it by the end of the year. It puts more knowledge into your head and it helps you learn more, and it's just cool to know. I think learning this way is changing the way that I do learn about history. Because of my old school, I really didn't do integration. I just did like one thing in one period and then a whole different thing in a different period. And then now it kind of changes the way and it gets me more interested in what we're learning about. Because in my old school, I really wasn't that interested in when we did cultural history.
Like in my old school, we didn't do any integrative learning. In one subject, it would be like, say, pots, and then in another one, it would be sports, and it would all be different. So we couldn't really learn as much about that one subject. Like at my old school, I don't think I was as interested as I am here. I really like learning here because it's a lot more like expansive and you can learn more. That definitely affects the way that I think and how I learn, because it's like so much more expansive and you can learn so much more than just like 45 minutes of one subject and then you switch to another and then you don't have time to think about it. First, we chose a settlement, we researched it, then we mapped it out how we think it would look, and we put it down on we did like a diagram, and then in art, and then in math, we did blueprints, and then the final thing we did we did a movie, and we did that in pretty much every class.
Well, in wellness, we're not just learning about sports, we're learning about yoga, which originated in India, and in cultural history, we're learning about ancient India. The spiral curriculum, it starts out small and it gets bigger and bigger. It kind of represents like your knowledge is growing and everything revolves around what you know.
If you don't have creativity in science, then you won't be able to discover new things. You'll just research things that have already been discovered. And so if you have creativity, then you can discover things yourself.
In the public school, you don't get that type of education. You don't get to see how cultural history maybe affects math, like the Pythagorean theorem. You don't get to learn facts in math about cultural history, or most likely in writing about. You don't get to learn Greek alphabet or things like that. In cultural history, we learned Pythagoras was an amazing philosopher and all he did for his community. But then in math, we learned what he did as a mathematician, as the Pythagorean theorem, which affected a lot, almost everything really in math. For the right triangle, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And it's good that we're still learning that now. And I don't think we should just learn that in math. I think we should go in depth in it in cultural history, just like we do at Ross.
At Ross, you don't only learn cultural history, math, science, you get to do it as well. If you learn something in cultural history and then a week later you learn something about it in science, and you feel like you know what the teacher's talking about, not like a totally new subject.
And I like the way that most of our teachers don't always go outright and say it to us oh, this is connected to history in this way, but you kind of experience it through your projects and your homework and what you study in class and with your teachers. And it kind of I feel like it develops your brain more because you actually think about it and you make interconnections in your head, how this is connected to this. Right now, what we're studying about is medieval history, and we were talking about chivalry in the code and how that system, what affects that system and what is inside that system. And my teacher said that a system is affected by what's in the inside of it. And in a way, I thought that was correct, but I've been experiencing this type of education for a while now. So my theory or concept is that it's not only what's in the inside, but also what's in the outside that affects it, because everything is just one big system. So you can't say that this one system is like just what's in the inside, that's what it is, because it's part of a much larger system which affects it. I see, let's say Fox News is talking badly about this one person, or one program is, and I go online and I search up like who sponsors that program, like who has shares and stocks in it, and then I could see how they influence the program and like what comes out on TV.
Well, from my experience, the whole thing with Ross is that everything is tied in to culture and global connections. So, you know, in art class, we learn about other cultures by looking at their art. Or, you know, in English class right now, we're studying Beowulf since we're going over the Vikings. We all have to be in tune with everything that's around us, like not just people and cultures, but things and objects in the environment around us. Everything matters, you know, it's like the butterfly effect kind of thing. Like, we can't really understand new scientific developments or how other people think without understanding them first. In history class, for example, a few weeks ago, we were doing a unit on the Great Depression in the US and how it affected all the jobs and how everybody was just, you know, it was such a big moment in American history, a big decade. And, you know, that's great to know about, but, you know, when you're comparing it to the 2008 recession and how have things changed and is America in decline right now, it really takes on a whole nother meaning. It makes you feel like you're in it, you know, you're participating in history in the present instead of just learning about what happened and not knowing why it applies to your life.
Well, because if everything's integrated, you can see how stuff affects other stuff. Like if in science you hear about how, you know, the water gets absorbed by soil and, you know, deforestation does this and this, you can like apply that to what you're learning in history about, oh, they deforested this and it did this, and you have more knowledge about each of the nodes because you know about the other nodes and you can form links better. Well, it's kind of like a system where like all the little factors are like nodes, like if you think of them as just little points, and then there's links connecting them, and then you can see how like when, you know, one node changes a little bit, the links, since it's linked to other nodes, the other nodes get affected, and so it's like it's a system that everything affects everything, like, you know, the world today or any kind of complex system.
And for science, you got to learn like Newton when you're learning Newton history, and you actually know how people develop different state of minds in different time period, how they come up with new ideas in science field. I don't think study is all about like staying in a classroom and learn like, oh, 1 + 1 is 2, or reciting all kind of boring stuff. I think study is actually gaining knowledge from the whole world. Like, you have to be conscious about what you were actually observing. And I think that gives you a physical experience about what you're trying to learn, and it makes you reconsider the importance of knowledge or importance of what you're learning more as you actually get in touch with the physical evidence.
It sort of teaches you to know that when you're approaching an issue, you can't only approach it from one side. You have to consider a lot of sides of the issue, not only how can I deal with this in one way, but also how can I deal with the science related to this, with the history related to this, with what realms of this are political or have to do with all sorts of different things, so that you really sort of join all these different viewpoints in order to make a really educated response to a topic, so that you're considering lots of different lots of different factors in what makes something happen. We're really given the chance to learn in many disciplines. We're really given a background that gives us information about culture, about history, about science, that lets us take all of the things that we know and apply it. So it sort of prepares us to be able, to take information from a wide variety of different areas, different realms, and sort of bring it all together and synthesize it in order to create solutions. So there's a lot of problem solving involved. I think we definitely do a lot of work that requires a lot of independent thinking and a lot of self-directed work and a lot of self-directed research and problem solving and like putting what we know into practice. And I think it's important for us to be able to use the things we're being taught in order to apply it to situations where it could be useful.
I don't see the necessary need of domains in the spirals because all of our projects, they jump, not necessarily just the projects, but all these topics that we're teaching jumps through domains where now you have, I think just having the threads. So following the threads, you are able to jump through different domains and different learning experience, different projects, different classes, and it allows you to see how the complexity evolves as society, the complexity within society increases. I don't think it's necessary that we consider them as different domains, even though they are. But really what we're taking here is a big history class combining all subjects. Getting used to this integrated way of studying it allows me great flexibility to cross domains, to understand things in a much more comprehensive way, where in my senior project I crossed through cultural history, mathematics, there's programming, and playwriting, creative writing. So what I've done was that I read historical events of democratic revolutions. I wrote not reviews, but like scholar works of the basics of authoritarian regimes versus democratic revolutions. And then based on my knowledge from that, I took it and wrote a system of differential equations. So that's the math domain, and hoping that quantitatively I could see something in such historical events. And then I learned to write computer programs in MATLAB and ran my model hundreds of times under different conditions. And then I was able to gain some sufficient knowledge of the basics of democratic revolutions, where then from my report I decided to write a short story in the form of a one-act play to reveal the findings of my model instead of traditional scientific report. So that is definitely what I got from the Ross, from being here, that interdisciplinary way of studying.